You know, when you sent in your request to learn more about this Opechancanough guy, honestly, the name didn't ring a bell.
Yeah,
Pocahontas, sure. I mean, everyone remembers Pocahontas, but not him.
right.
But then you mentioned he almost single-handedly wiped out Jamestown, not once, but twice.
Yeah,
And, well, that got my attention.
I bet.
So we did some digging. We found this interview with a historian, Dr. James Horn, who wrote a whole book about Opechancanough. And wow, it turns out this guy was way more than just, some warrior.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go, Opechancanoug's story, it kind of turns everything we think we know on its head.
Yeah.
He's often portrayed as this like fierce enemy of the early English settlers. But when you really look at it, his story is so much more complicated than that. It's like this study in leadership, cultural clashes, and what happens when you underestimate your opponent.
You got that right. And his story, it begins in a place you might not expect. Dr. Horn takes us all the way back to 1561, not in the forests of Virginia, but get this, in Spain.
Spain, really?
Spain. Apparently, Opechancanough was kidnapped as a teenager. Can you believe this?
Right.
By Spanish explorers taken to Europe. Can you imagine being ripped from your world like that?
Oh, no.
And just thrown into, like, the heart of 16th century Europe.
That's wild.
Wild. And not just any part of Europe. He ends up being presented to King Philip II.
No way.
Yes. What's fascinating to me is that he wasn't just some random captive. He really made an impression on people. Opechancanough, who was known then as Don Luis, he seemingly converts to Catholicism. And he even gets the king to send him back to Virginia as a missionary.
Missionary.
That's what I'm saying.
Huh.
So he spends a few years in Mexico City, really immersed in European culture, witnessing the impact of Spanish colonialism firsthand on what was left of the Aztec Empire.
Oh.
It makes you think, talk about a crash course in the dangers of, European ambition.
Right.
It's striking to me, this experience, it could have easily broken him, but instead it seems like it actually forged him like into a leader determined to protect his own people from a similar fate. And it makes you wonder, was he playing the long game all along, biding his time?
Yeah. Because when he gets back to Virginia,
Yeah.
right, with this group of Jesuit priests in 1570, the whole charade just drops.
Yeah.
Within months, he's orchestrating this brutal attack on the mission. They kill all but one of the priests.
Jeez.
And he sheds that Spanish persona, and he reemerges as this Powhatan war leader.
Yeah.
Just bam, like a switch flipped. It really makes you think, was this a calculated response to what he saw in Europe?
It does. Like, he recognized the threat of European expansion, and decided he was going to dedicate himself to building up his people's strength.
To resist, yeah.
To resist. And that's exactly what he does. He becomes incredibly powerful. The war chief to the paramount chief, Powhatan. And by the time the English show up in 1607, the Powhatan, they'd created this incredible confederacy of tribes. They were ready for what was coming.
They were prepared, which is, this is important for you, listener, because this means the English weren't just stumbling onto some random unorganized land. They were walking right into this complex and sophisticated political landscape.
That's a great point.
And one that was already on high alert, in no small part because of Opechancanoug's foresight. But the English, they had no idea what they were walking into.
None. And this is what sets the stage for this power struggle. Just a few months after they land, Captain John Smith, he's out searching for food, and he's captured by, you guessed it, Opechancanough.
Oh, wow.
And this encounter, it's described in Smith's own journal, and you can really see the suspicion from the Powhatan side.
Right.
Smith actually recounts Powhatan, the paramount chief, saying this.
Yet, Captain Smith, some doubt I have of your coming hither. That makes me not so kindly seek to relieve you as I would. For many do inform me your coming is not for trade, but to invade my people and possess my country. I mean, talk about reading them the riot act.
He saw right through their little charade, the whole trade thing.
Totally. And this really sets the stage for this super tense dance between the two sides.
Yeah.
Both of them trying to figure out the other's strengths and weaknesses, while, keeping their real intentions hidden.
It's a dangerous game.
Yeah, but remember, Opechancanough, he'd seen how the Spanish operated firsthand.
Right.
He knew the English probably wanted more than just trade.
Yeah.
And he was determined to protect his people, even if it meant playing along for a time.
Right.
So he allows the English to establish Jamestown, but he keeps them close,
Observing.
watching them. Opechancanough understood that open warfare, at least for now, would be a disaster. He was playing the long game.
Right. But this strategy also meant the English could dig in. become more established. What do you think was going through his mind during these early years?
Well, Dr. Horn points out something really interesting. Opechancanough was really interested in English firearms.
Really?
Yeah, he understood the power of that technology. He even tried to convince the English to basically make the Powhatan like a super tribe,
Yeah,
their allies, with access to their guns and manufactured goods.
that's smart.
Yeah,
He saw how those weapons could, like, totally change the balance of power in the region. But of course, the English had their own agenda.
of course.
And this period, from 1607 to 1614, it's fascinating because it's not just brute force. It's like a battle of wits.
Yeah.
Both sides constantly probing, looking for any advantage they can get.
Exactly. And then, boom, 1614, Pocahontas enters the picture.
Mm.
And, most people know the romanticized version, the Disney version.
Right.
But the real story is, well, it's a lot more complicated than that.
It's true, and it's easy to forget that her capture by the English, that was strategic. And her marriage to John Rolfe in 1614, that was huge for the colony. It ushered in this period of, like, relative peace.
Right.
But was it genuine?
Well, according to Dr. Horn, it was all part of Opechancanoug's strategy. He was lulling the English into this false sense of security,
Yeah.
giving them this illusion of friendship while secretly preparing for something much bigger.
That's wild. So Opechancanough spent 5 years carefully orchestrating this massive deception, the patience, the cunning.
Oh, yeah. While the English were busy growing tobacco, building their settlements, he was building an army, forging alliances, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when he did, it was devastating. March 22nd, 1622, the day that would forever be known as the 1622 massacre. It was just a coordinated assault on English settlements. I mean, all across this huge area.
Wow.
Opechancanoug's forces, they used deception, they infiltrated the settlements, they would appear friendly, in the days leading up to the attack.
Wow.
This element of surprise,
Yeah.
that was key to how effective it was, how devastating.
Yeah, hundreds of colonists, they were killed, homes destroyed, farms just wiped out. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was like a military operation.
Yeah.
It was planned down to the last detail.
Absolutely. Dr. Horn describes it as one of the most successful attacks by Native Americans on a European colony in all of history.
It makes you wonder, what were the English thinking? Were they just like totally caught off guard?
It seems that way. They'd grown complacent during those years of relative peace. They totally underestimated Opechancanough, his brilliance, his strategic thinking, and I think they underestimated the resentment that was bubbling under the surface.
Yeah.
Jamestown itself, it was only spared because at the last minute they got a warning. A Powhatan man, he'd converted to Christianity and he tipped them off.
Wow. So Opechancanough almost pulled it off, almost achieved his goal of driving the English out. But they didn't leave. Why? Why didn't they just cut their losses after something that devastating?
It's a good question. And it's one Opechancanough probably asked himself. I think he miscalculated. He misjudged the English, their tenacity, their greed, and he underestimated the allure of tobacco.
Oh, yeah. Tobacco had become like the cash crop of the colony.
Exactly. The English saw Virginia as this land of opportunity, and they weren't going to let something like a massacre stop them.
So this one plant,
Right.
it plays this key role in shaping the fate of a nation. Even though the Virginia Company, they lose their charter because of the massacre, the English crown steps in, and they just double down on their commitment to the colony. This must have been devastating for Opechancanough.
It was a major turning point. His strategy, which was brilliant, it backfired. Instead of driving the English away, he accidentally made them even more determined. That peace that he so carefully crafted, it was gone. And a new chapter was about to begin, a much more brutal chapter, the Second Anglo-Powhatan War.
This war lasted for 10 years. It's this grim story of raids, reprisals, and just escalating violence on both sides. But what gets me is that even when faced with superior firepower, relentless expansion, Opechancanough still refused to back down.
He was a fighter.
Yeah.
And he adapted.
Yeah.
He started using guerrilla warfare,
Yeah.
using the terrain to his advantage.
He knew he couldn't win a traditional war.
Right, so he focused on wearing down the English, trying to make it just too expensive for them to stay. This was a common tactic, actually, among Native American groups fighting European invaders. It shows how resourceful they were, how adaptable.
They had to be to survive.
Exactly.
But at the same time, the English kept pushing further inland, displacing more tribes. They took over the best farmland, disrupted traditional hunting grounds. It really undermined the Powhatans' ability to survive. And it wasn't just about the land, it was about the way of life that depended on it.
You're right. It was a systematic destruction of their world. And even though they eventually signed a peace treaty in 1632, it was fragile, built on resentment.
And mistrust.
Yeah. Opechancanough knew it was only a matter of time before the conflict started up again.
He was right. 12 years later, in 1644, word reached Virginia that England was in the middle of a civil war. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What was going on back in England, and how did it impact the colonies?
Well, the English Civil War was this huge conflict between the monarchy and Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it led to King Charles I being executed and a republic being established.
Wow.
Yeah, and all this upheaval in England, it had this ripple effect across the colonies. It created uncertainty, division.
Makes sense.
And Opechancanough, he saw an opportunity. English weakness. He thought, this is it. This is my chance to finally drive them out.
He was almost 100 years old at this point. It's remarkable that he was still leading his people, still fighting for their survival after all these years.
It is. And this wasn't an isolated thing. All across the Americas, native groups were actively resisting European expansion. And they would often capitalize on moments just like this.
When the colonizers were weak. Exactly. Moments of instability. It really shows Opechancanoug's determination, his resilience.
Yeah.
He'd seen his whole world turned upside down by these newcomers, and he refused to give up. So he gathers his forces, and he launches one final desperate attack.
But this time, the English, they were ready.
Yeah.
They had learned from their mistakes, they were better equipped, and they had a new governor, Sir William Berkeley. And he was ruthless.
Oh, yeah. Berkeley was ambitious, ruthless, and he was determined to crush any resistance to English rule. He led this brutal campaign against the Powhatan, burning villages, destroying their crops, taking captives.
That's a dark turn.
It is. And the brutality of it all, it really highlights how much things had changed. In the beginning, the English relied on the Powhatan to survive.
Right.
But now they just wanted total control, total dominance.
And it's a tragic end to Opechancanoug's long struggle.
It is.
He was captured, imprisoned in Jamestown. What happened to him? This is where it gets heartbreaking. He's imprisoned in Jamestown, and Opechancanough is shot in the back.
Yeah, no.
By one of his own guards. Just a senseless act of violence. It ended the life of one of the most, remarkable figures in early American history.
What a tragic, just ignominious end for a leader who fought so hard for his people.
I know.
It really speaks to the brutality of this whole conflict, and the fact that he was killed by one of his own people, that just adds another layer to this whole story.
It does. It's hard not to feel the weight of that tragedy, Opechancanough, he lived through so much upheaval. The arrival of Europeans, the clash of cultures, the devastation of colonialism.
And he didn't just witness it, he shaped it.
He did.
He was this brilliant strategist, a skilled diplomat, a fierce warrior. He fought to protect his people, their way of life. And his story really makes you rethink this whole idea of heroes and villains.
It really does. And Dr. Horn points out that Opechancanoug's legacy, it's not just about resistance to the English. He also played a key role in preventing further Spanish expansion in the Chesapeake.
Oh, interesting. He created this powerful, unified force, and it sent a message to anyone who wanted to colonize the area. This is not going to be easy.
Right.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that history is full of unintended consequences. His actions, which were driven by this desire to protect his people from one European power, might have actually shielded them from another.
Yeah, it really highlights how complex history is. All the different relationships, the motivations. It's not always just good versus evil.
It's never that simple. So where does this leave us? Opechancanough is gone, the Powhatan Confederacy is shattered, and the English colony of Virginia, well, it's firmly established. It's a victory for the English, but at what cost?
The cost was huge. So many lives lost, entire cultures destroyed, peoples displaced. The trauma of colonialism, it's still felt today. And Opechancanoug's story, it's this stark reminder of that cost.
It makes you think, when we look back at history, how do we reconcile the triumphs and the tragedies? How do we honor the people who fought and lost, the people who were marginalized, silenced?
It's a challenge to acknowledge the complexities, to recognize everyone's perspective, and to use that understanding of the past to try to build a better future.
That's a good point. And it's important to remember that Opechancanoug's story, it's not just some ancient tale, It's connected to the present. Dr. Horn reminds us of that by talking about the Pamunkey tribe.
Oh, right.
They're direct descendants of the Powhatan. They still live in Virginia today. Their existence is a testament to Opechancanoug's legacy, this legacy of resistance. Resilience.
It's true. Their story and so many others, they remind us that the past is never really gone. It echoes in the present. It shapes who we are. And it reminds us that we have a responsibility to learn from the people who came before us.
So you came to us wanting to learn more about this guy who almost wiped out Jamestown twice. What did we learn?
I think we learned about a leader who was incredibly resilient, a brilliant strategist, a man who navigated a world in collision.
He challenged those who underestimated him.
He did.
And ultimately, he shaped the course of history in ways that, well, we're still grappling with today.
That's true.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on this fascinating, often overlooked figure in early American history.
We did our best.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering those untold stories that make us rethink everything we thought we knew about the world.